Welcome to the lecture for Crisis Intervention. We'll be talking today about crises related to sexual assault. And I don't know about you all, but for me this is always one of the hardest chapters to read in reading about survivors' stories and all the painful emotions that they experience. And all crises are difficult to work with and can be emotionally draining for the therapist. But these in particular seem especially challenging. Let's go ahead and get started talking about sexual assaults. First, talk about rape involving adult victims. Just talk about some general background information. The definition of rape. Want to talk about it in this course, we'll use the definition that James uses. That it's a sexual act with another person without that person's consent. Right? But it's important to note that there are people use different definitions, and in the eyes of the law, there's a distinction between rape and sexual assault. With sexual assault being a more kind of inclusive term, more similar to the definition we're using, and rape being restricted to those acts involving sexual intercourse. But when we talk about it here, we'll talk about any kind of sexual act that is perpetrated without the other person's consent. If we talk about the typical perpetrator, excuse me, and there are a variety of statistics out there trying to get a handle on who the typical rapist is, but there doesn't seem to be atypical. There's not a profile. We can say with pretty good confidence that the majority of individuals who commit rape are men. It's not all men, but it is predominantly men with predominantly female victims. But again, just because it's predominantly male perpetrators and female victims doesn't mean that you should say, okay, well, that's how it is and there are no exceptions, because the exceptions will need your help just as much in terms of male victims and also people who have been victimized by a female. But generally, the typical perpetrator is at least male. Other than that, perpetrators come from a wide variety of demographic backgrounds. In terms of why rape happens, you can read James' description of different theories, really, about individual motivations. But there isn't any kind of one explanation. Well, here's why it happens. It seems to be for different perpetrators, different reasons. But in general, it involves one or both of these two factors in terms of power and sex. So exerting power and dominance over another person, or sometimes it's about sex. And for a long time in the field, there was this thought that it's never about sex; it's all about power. And there's political background to that, but research has suggested that no, sometimes it is also about sex, and that there's not this kind of clean distinction between motivations, but generally about dominating another person, but also sometimes about sex itself. Whatever the individual's motivation, there's also substantial literature out there looking at how our cultural climate contributes to the perpetration of rape, and how certain rape myths, beliefs that are shared throughout our culture and other cultures about rape tend to perpetuate it and keep it from ever going away. And again, James talks about several of them. I'll summarize a few. One of the biggest ones is that the victim is responsible, that they did something for this to happen, dressed a certain way, acted a certain way, and this is a way, on some level, of trying to justify something that is very kind of naturally to us offensive. And it's kind of horrible to think about. So to keep from having to acknowledge that this kind of horrible, offensive thing can happen to people, can happen to anybody, it's easier to try to blame the person who did it. Right? Alternatively, we try to protect ourselves by making some other attributions in terms of the perpetrator. That, well, rape only happens with these kind of crazy strangers and who are violent and they overpower someone. And if it's not a stranger, then it's not rape. Right? And so people say, well, if you're dating, well, it's not rape. It's just a misunderstanding. Right? Or people say, well, if people are married, it can't be rape. And in some states, that's how the law was written, that there was no such thing as marital rape. But most people, at least in our community, acknowledge now that rape can happen just as much with someone you know as with someone you don't know, and it's about a 50-50 chance if you are sexually assaulted that the person who is the perpetrator is someone that you do know. So any kind of pre-existing relationship does not preclude the right of an individual to say no to sexual contact. And so if someone violates the other person's right to say no, then that is still rape, regardless of regardless of the relationship context. Another myth is that, well, rape, that only happens if there's violence, and this goes back to kind of blaming the victim. Well, if the person didn't fight enough to where they were knocked unconscious and nearly dead, then again they must have really wanted it. It's couldn't have been rape. And again, we know that that's not true because there are a lot of things that can happen in sexual assaults where you say no and the person doesn't respect that, and the fear and other things may prevent the person from fighting, to the death. But it doesn't make it any less of sexual assault or of rape. And the last one I'll touch on is that victims falsify charges. And it's not a myth that no one has ever falsely cried rape. Right? That has happened. And people have falsely cried murder. People have falsely cried a lot of things. Most anything that you can accuse someone of, at some point in time, somebody has done falsely. But false rape allegations don't occur at any rate higher than other crimes. And it's unfortunate whenever false claims are made. And it seems to be a very rare instance, but when they are made, they seem to be very well publicized, giving them the appearance of being more common than they really are, which again makes rape, prevents rape from ever going away, because then when other people are guilty, there's more doubt. Well, are they just making these false charges for revenge or to strike out at someone? Because I heard one time about somebody doing it, right? So you hear one time, and then you apply that to all these other cases. Okay, but generally that is not something that people want to say. Hey, I've been raped. Usually, people are experience a great deal of shame surrounding sexual assaults, and they don't want to call attention to it. And so most sexual assaults go unreported. In terms of typical victim responses, there is no single typical response or right response, but there's some common patterns of responses have been observed in victims of sexual assault. In terms of the initial reaction, one way to think about it is breaking down to one of three types of reactions, and it might be a combination of these, but one would be kind of an expressive reaction when the person appears agitated, fearful, maybe even hysterical, so lots of emotion, may suffer from crying spells or anxiety attacks, so really expressing lots of the negative affect. Alternatively, maybe more controlled, so appears to be without emotion, acts as if nothing happened and everything's fine. Right? But beneath the surface, generally we suspect that there's significant emotional turmoil, but for whatever reason, probably some individual personality difference, exerting a lot of control regarding the outward expression of their emotions. And then third, shock and disbelief, where there's a strong sense of disorientation, may have difficulty concentrating, making decisions, doing everyday tasks, and may also have a poor recall of the assault. So more kind of, if you think about dissociative symptoms, possibly being present, and so not over-controlled, not emotional, but just in shock. So the initial reaction may look like any one of those, or some combination. And then there are also ongoing difficulties following that initial shock. frequently characterized by fear, fear of a repeated attack, fear of being alone, and then the fear and the experience of this of anxiety, intense anxiety for a long period of time, might even develop into something like generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder, right? And depending on whether other individual vulnerabilities they may have, right? Because whenever you feel anxious for a long period of time and your brain and your body are having that anxiety response, it changes the way your brain works. It makes you more vulnerable to experience more anxiety, possibly in a pathological manner, developing another DSM diagnosis. Often there's a negative view of self, feeling degraded or soiled, and self-blame. It's my fault. I should have known better. I should have avoided that situation, and now I'm a bad person. I'm not worthy of being loved. No one can ever be with me. A lack of trust and other interpersonal difficulties, especially with members of the opposite sex, but may generalize to others as well. And because there's kind of this fundamental assumption that people won't hurt us. Right? That the world is generally a safe place, and when somebody hurts you in this way, it really takes that away and challenges you to your ability to trust others. And also, quite frequently, the person may experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? The high risk of developing PTSD. Remember, the key features of PTSD are re-experiencing traumatic events, so in this case, re-experiencing the rape, numbing or avoidance, which would be consistent with that kind of shock and disbelief reaction, but also possibly the controlled reaction, and then hyper arousal, so being on edge, and that exaggerated startle response, that kind of thing. Okay, so in terms of crisis intervention, obviously you start with assessment. So you want to assess the person's safety level, right? If they've recently were victimized, there is a risk of self-harm, but also potentially homicidal acts. So you want to assess for that and take steps accordingly to keep the person safe. You also need to assess for medical needs. Do they need medical treatment as a result of the shock? And then after you've established those, you go through and you do your basic crisis triage, assessing affective, cognitive, and behavioral functioning to get an idea of what the key feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are and their level of mobility. And in terms of crisis intervention, important here to provide non-judgmental support. So really those kind of your core clinical skills in terms of empathy and acceptance, and unconditional positive regard, super important here. This is a person who potentially, and all individuals are different, but potentially a very kind of fragile psyche at this point, because sexual assault is an assault not only on the body but on the self, on your psychic self, and so need to be able to create a safe place physically and also psychologically for this person. And these individuals, again, have a tendency to blame themselves. Right? So you don't want to say anything that could be misconstrued as blaming them. You don't want to ask questions like, "Well, why were you out late by yourself? Why were you out so late by yourself?" Right? And questions that may help the person identify what things increase or decrease the risk of victimization are important at some point. Because we know that people who have been victims of sexual assault are at increased risk for being victimized again. But that's more part of long-term therapy and not a part of crisis intervention. Right now, they don't need to figure that out right now. Right? There are other things that are more important. Right? So we need to be non-judgmental, supportive. And there's a phrase that in one of the vignettes in our text I really liked, where they're talking to the person who said, "You are a victim, you are a survivor." And it's an important distinction. So you were a victim. Somebody did something to you, right? Which there's a lot of stuff in that simple statement. You were a victim, right? It says part of that is it's not your fault. It's something somebody did to you, not something you did to yourself. Right? It's also past tense. You're not a victim now. You were a victim. That happened in the past. And then the next part is the present tense. You are, what you are now, is a survivor. And a survivor isn't the same thing as a victim. Right? Because a survivor is somebody who's now, the victimization is in the past, and now I'm somebody who's going to be stronger than I was before for having survived what somebody did to me. Right? So you were a victim, you are a survivor, is kind of a key attitude to have in place. Even if you don't say that phrase to the person, thinking along those lines in your work with survivors of sexual assault, I think is important. Again, James talks a lot about kind of the therapeutic stuff you would do for people who are survivors of sexual assault. But again, this is crisis intervention, so you're not going to be doing long-term therapy. But doesn't mean you can't plant the seeds, right? If you're familiar with what needs to happen in therapy, you can potentially plant the therapeutic seeds during crisis intervention. So one of the things we know about the therapeutic work is going to involve some cognitive restructuring, right? About challenging and reframing distorted beliefs about what happened and about the self. So like that message that you are not damaged goods. You want to plant the seed for that now by treating them as if they are not damaged goods, as if they are still a whole, beautiful, perfect person, and not something that's been marred by what somebody else did to them. And it's about how you talk, and it's about what you say. I wish I gave you more specifics about how to tell people that, but it's more about your attitude about in terms of planting those seeds and kind of knowing where that person is going to need to go, right? In terms of how they see themselves, how they see assault, but also in terms of we know that they're going to have to probably do some processing work and process the trauma, right? May not need to process the trauma right now during the crisis intervention. Depends on the individual. Most, I say, probably wouldn't. We need to get them safe and secure. And the processing will come later in long-term therapy. Right? But letting them know that this is something that has happened, and it will change the way you see the world and the way you feel about yourself. And it's something that you're going to need to talk with someone about to figure out how to fit this experience into the story of your life. And so it may be hard to figure out how it fits on your own, but people can help you with that. So you're planting the seeds there for the work that somebody's going to do later in terms of processing the traumatic event. But again, primarily for crisis intervention, you want to restore a sense of safety and control. Your primary goal, right? And you may need to overtly tell them, you are safe. No one here is going to hurt you. Depending on what their reaction is, if they're having that kind of expressive reaction where uncontrolled affect in the room, telling them very clearly, you are safe. No one here is going to hurt you. The person who did this is not here. We will not let them in here. They can't get you in here. Right now, you are safe. And just very clearly communicating that message. In addition to that, you want to affirm the steps that they've taken to survive. You commend them for doing whatever it took to still be here. Maybe they couldn't control that this thing happened to them. They were assaulted, but they're still here. So their loss of control wasn't complete or total. If it was, they wouldn't be here. Even if what they did was not to struggle. Okay, by not struggling, you're still alive. If you'd struggled, maybe they'd have killed you, and you wouldn't be here. So you try to develop some sense of control in whatever way you can. That may also involve preparing them for the medical and legal procedures that they're going to need to go through. And exactly what those procedures are may vary depending on your location. But they'll need to see some medical professional, hopefully someone who is trained to do a rape kit. And generally, most, at least moderate-sized cities will have someone with appropriate training in the ER department of the hospitals. But you'll want to be familiar with your local procedures and talk to them about what's going to happen and who's going to be there. And then and the police will want to talk to you. And you want to do this moving slowly, right? Thoroughly, and after you've already made efforts to express empathy and enter their subjective world. So we don't start off, okay, well, here's what's going to happen. No, first, okay, you're feeling this, and I'm making this connection with you, We're going to get that set up, and then I'm going to start giving you some information. Right? I'm going to arm you with this information because it's going to help regain a sense of control, but it will also hopefully help reduce the likelihood of any kind of secondary traumatization that might occur, which sometimes occurs when people they've been traumatized, they go to get help, and the getting help is equally traumatic if the people who are asking questions or doing the rape examination are cold or uncaring, or they seem to be suspicious. Or did this really happen to you? They can be traumatized again. So you want to prepare them for what kind of things might happen and why people might be acting the way they're acting. Again, trying to help them reestablish the sense of control by encouraging autonomy. Giving them simple choices to help restore a sense of control. So we can call someone to be with you at the hospital if you'd like. Who would you like us to call? Right. So I'm just going to call somebody. If I'm going to say, if you can tell me somebody, maybe they can. I don't know. Okay. Well, then I'm going to take over and I'm going to step in and call somebody. But if you can make a choice, good. And I want you to say, oh, you can make these choices. Okay. You also want to normalize the responses. You could talk about some of the different reactions that survivors of rape have, and James provides a pretty ample description of some of those responses. To help them understand that their thoughts and feelings, behaviors aren't crazy. They aren't going nuts. This is how some people feel. Right? And I really like the way the therapist in one of the vignettes said, you're going to have a lot of different reactions to this. They're not the same for everyone. So don't be alarmed if you have some and not others. Right? Sometimes if we tell clients, oh, you'll probably have intrusive memories of this the assault happening again. You may have dreams, and you're going to have dreams about it. And if they don't have those thoughts, they don't have those dreams, they go, oh my gosh, well maybe I wasn't really raped. And they'll start doubting themselves. Right? People respond differently. So we don't tell them what they will experience. We say, here's some things you might experience because it is different. Right? And you can also add, people have lots of different ways of coping with this. But the main thing right now is for you to feel as safe and secure as you can. So on a normalized response, emphasizing control and safety. Okay, that's mainly what I'm doing with the individual for crisis intervention. Okay? But then I also have to pay attention to the support system. The people, if somebody brought them in who's going to be going with them to the hospital, may need to educate them. They need to know about what to expect in terms of reactions the survivor might have. And you can give them the same kind of spiel. They may have this. If they don't have this, doesn't mean anything weird. People have different reactions, right? But then also how they can best be supportive of the person. And again, James provides a pretty good list of things to consider under that section, critical supports. But I think they can be pretty well summed up with the two following points. That the support system needs to be available and supportive, but not intrusive or controlling. So if the person doesn't want to be alone, be there for them. If they want to be alone, let them be alone. Again, this is assuming that you've already assessed that the risk of self-harm is not high. If it is, obviously, we don't leave people alone. But so you're available, you're willing to talk about it, but you're not going to make somebody talk about it. You're going to meet them where they are. And they might be a lot of different places. People have different reactions. So just be available, be supportive, but don't push, and don't try to make them react the way you think they should react. Okay. And then also to be non-judgmental and accepting, because again, there's that tendency to blame oneself. And so not only do we need to be accepting, we need to help educate the support system how important it is to be non-judgmental and to be accepting, and not to ask those questions. What the hell were you doing? How did you let this happen? Right? And it's not that it's wrong for that thought to occur to somebody, because it occurs because they're so angry that it happened and they want to understand why it happened. Right? So I don't want to make the support system feel bad for having these thoughts, but we need to make them understand that that's not going to be helpful to this person right now, and they're not going to give you an answer that's going to make you feel any better right now. So don't say those things. Right? Related to the support system, there's also potential for secondary crises in the support system. If the spouse, partner, lover, parent, of the survivor may have a crisis reaction themselves when learning about the assault, and possibly even homicidal ideation. So you may have a separate crisis situation running parallel to the one involving the survivor, which you would have to attend to. So again, crisis intervention is all about restoring a sense of safety and control, right, getting that equilibrium for now. But for this particular crisis, in some crises we say, well, therapy might be indicated, might not. For this one, yeah, therapy is indicated. Referral for individual and or group therapy, always recommended. And not everybody may need it. In terms of some people, if they go through crisis intervention after sexual assault, they may never have any kind of individual therapy, group therapy. If they have a strong support system and a couple of things in place, they may not develop any kind of psychiatric, psychological symptoms in the absence of therapy. But our assumption is that most people will experience ongoing difficulties that can be lessened by participating in therapy. So we always make that referral for rape. Okay, moving on to adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So in terms of crisis intervention, this topic may come up if you suspect an abuse history, right? Because individuals who have a history of childhood sexual abuse, when they become adults, they are at heightened risk for psychological crises, right? For one of the reasons, they're at heightened risk for developing post-traumatic stress disorder and a variety of other disorders as well, including depression, substance use, certain personality disorders. So somebody comes in crisis, not necessarily because of sexual assault, but you suspect child sexual abuse history based on some things they said and the fact that they're very disjointed, lack of trust in others, and maybe there's some pattern related to their sexuality that makes you think, okay, well, this person may have a history of child sexual abuse. It is not your job in crisis intervention to delve into that right here and now. Right? You address the immediate crisis that brought them in. But you do make an appropriate referral. Right? So we're not going to have them, if they come in because they're getting divorced, and in the process of talking about the crisis of the divorce, you think, okay, well, this person sounds like all the things they're saying makes me think there's a history of child sex abuse. You don't say, were you abused as a child? You don't open that up in crisis intervention. You deal with the crisis at hand. But once you have that crisis resolved, you have them back into equilibrium enough that the immediate crisis is over, you do make an appropriate referral. Something like, you say something like, it seems that there's some things beyond the current situation that are affecting you strongly and affecting your ability to be a happy, healthy individual. And there are people who can help, an individual therapy group, whatever you're going to recommend might be a way, might be a place for you to safely discuss these things. So I strongly recommend you do that. You make the referral. Okay. But you don't open it up in crisis intervention because, again, you're doing short-term stuff. And even though that abuse history may contribute to the current crisis, it's not the immediate cause of the current crisis. Okay. However, the current crisis might result because of a disclosure of some previous abuse or discovery. And that might precipitate a crisis. So a couple things to think about in that instance. One, reporting requirements. If someone, you see an adult and they tell you that they were abused as a child, it's not, you are not required by law to report that history of child abuse. Right? The requirement for report is for to prevent ongoing abuse. If a person is an adult now, then you don't have that obligation to report. Unless, now, if they say I was abused by my father, and I'm worried now that my kids are having sleepovers at their house, and my mom said that she'd make sure nothing happened, but I just don't know. Okay, well, now I'm required to report that because now I have a documented history of abuse. I know that perpetrators of abuse rarely is an isolated incident. So I have a reasonable suspicion that that there are children at risk of abuse, and so I'm going to report that. Right? But if it's just this person abused me and now they're in a retirement community, they're nowhere near kids, then there's no requirement to report. In terms of other than the requirement, if the person wants to pursue legal options, It depends on how old they are when the abuse happened and what state they're in. In Texas, the statute of limitations on sexual assault of a child is 10 years after the 18th birthday. Generally, with kind of weird exceptions, if there's physical evidence of the assault before that time, and they can't match the physical evidence to somebody, then there's no statute of limitations. So if there's DNA left over, they can't find the perpetrator, but then 20 years later they find a match, no statute of limitations. But generally you don't have that. So generally it's 10 years after the 18th birthday in Texas anyway. But even then, not required to report it, unless again other children are in danger. It's important to talk about the phenomenon referred to as false memories. So if we think about somebody has a crisis event because they have discovered or recovered memories of abuse, and that's led to a psychological crisis for themselves or a crisis within their family. It's important to have some knowledge about false memories. And what we know is that false memories can be created. They can be created in lab settings. They can be created in therapy settings. That being said, it does not mean that all recovered memories are false. It suggests that some recovered memories may be false, especially in certain therapeutic situations where therapists are asking certain leading questions, and just the fact that some of them can be false, and that you can't distinguish between a false memory and a real memory by how confident you are in it. If you say, I'm 100% confident this happened, very well may still be a false memory. When we know that by creating false memories in laboratory settings, and they ask people to rate their confidence, well, how confident this really happened? 100%. And yet we know, because we created the memory, that it's absolutely not true. So confidence in memory is not related to truth. So general statement here is be very wary about trying to help someone recover repressed memories. If someone comes to you and says that they have a repressed memory, my advice is to talk to them about the memory and try not to ask leading questions, but then talk with them about how this memory, if you have no way of verifying if it's true, and you talk about how you could verify, how you can ask people involved, but if you have no way of verifying it's true, it still can affect you. This memory, if this is what you believe, if we can't determine if it's true or not, it can still affect you. So let's deal with it therapeutically and how it's affecting you, regardless of trying to figure out if it's true or not, if we have no way of figuring it out. Right? But just again, be wary about going into the work of delving in and trying to recover memories for clients. You seem like you probably have a history of child abuse, and they say no, and you go, well, I want you to imagine back when you're a child and start imagining things. No, don't do that, because you're probably going to plant memories by doing that. Okay. For people though who do disclose as adults or maybe have recovered memories, it's important again to educate them about PTSD symptoms, kind of like victims of rape, because PTSD is a common experience. So the experiences need to be normalized, and they need to be given information that the treatment is available and effective for the treatment of those symptoms. In general, the intervention is similar. Assessment intervention is similar for other sexual assault in terms of what to do for crisis intervention. With the other addition, kind of added issues being possibly dealing with complicity on the parts of others. So I was abused by this person, and this other person knew about it and didn't do anything. And so we have other relationship issues going on, and then also possibly greater difficulty for the survivor being believed and supported by those around them the more time has lapsed since a sexual assault. Right? If we're talking about an adult thinking about reporting something that happened when they were children versus an adult reporting about something that happened as an adult. So again, important to be supportive and help the person, regardless of what they're able to do in terms of seeking justice. As a therapist, I can't help you seek. I can't find justice for you. right? And I can maybe educate you about some of the things that will happen to you when you try to go through the justice system. But my job is to help you deal with this on a emotional, cognitive, behavioral level yourself. And again, find some way to make this fit this experience into the story of your life. And again, that's more kind of long-term therapy stuff. So obviously, you're going to want to refer them for individual and/or group therapy. Okay, for child sexual abuse survivors, in terms of reporting requirements, you are required to report if there's a child and they've been abused and you have knowledge of it. You have suspicion of it. It's not even that you know it happened. You suspect it has happened. Report it. And you don't weigh, well, what's going to happen to this family if I report? Could maybe I help them overcome this in therapy and we could avoid the reporting? No, not an option for you. Legally, ethically mandated, report it. Call Department of Family Protective Services, CPS, whatever it is called in your area, and make the report. If you've got a non-offending parent bringing a child in with you, you can ask them if they want to make the report. And say, no, I can't do it. Okay, I'll do it for you. You can do it in the office with them there, so they know exactly what's going on. And it helps if you do it with them there. Because say, okay, I'm with the non-offending parent. You're talking to an investigator, and you will tell the parent they may want to ask you some questions. Okay, and so you tell them, okay, if you want to ask them anything, they're right here. And that way, you're speeding up the investigation a bit by identifying some of the key players. So, required reporting. In terms of assessment and intervention, similar for other sexual assaults, with the difference being that obviously everything's got to be modified to be developmentally appropriate when working with children. So, for your intervention with the child, you're doing a lot of the same stuff in terms of establishing a sense of safety and to some degree control, although children have less control over their lives than adults do, and so they generally have less of an expectation to have control. So here the sense of control is more someone in your life is going to keep you safe and is going to be in control. So if dad was the offending parent, mom is not going to let this happen anymore. See, she's right here with you. She brought you in. She's very upset this happened. But she's going to keep you somewhere safe, and she's got it together. Right? Whereas with adults, it's more you can keep it together. You can make decisions to keep yourself safe. With kids, the parents become that proxy. But establishing a sense of safety, so talking about you're safe. No, I'm not going to let anybody else hurt you. This is, and along with that, clearly defined situation. This isn't something you did. You aren't bad or wrong or evil. You didn't ask for this. This is something that somebody did to you. No matter what they said, no matter what you felt, you're a child, they're an adult. They were wrong to do this to you. This is and there are laws against this and things set up to try to keep things from happening, and we have things in place for when this happens to help kids, because we know that it's not something you did. It's something that was done to you, which again, you were a victim, now you're a survivor. And then we start moving toward what it means to be a survivor. And also, just like with adult survivors of rape, preparing them for the medical and legal procedures that they're going to have to go through in terms of medical examinations and the sexual assault interview that is typically done with kids. And you don't want to prep them in terms of, okay, when they ask you this, how are you going to answer it? How are you going to tell them? You don't want to do that, because then you're going to, well, one thing, you're going to screw up the legal case. But you want to tell them they're going to ask you questions about what happened, and it's okay to be honest. And that's all you have to say. You don't have to tell them how to answer. Just tell them it's okay to be honest. Nobody's going to be mad at you for what you say, and nobody's going to hurt you for what you say. Just go in there and answer their questions honestly, and everything's going to be fine. But then we also have intervention with the parent, most likely in these cases. It's important for the parent to help them reestablish some sense of equilibrium, because again, they're the ones that we have to establish a sense of control in, because they're going to be the anchor for the kid if we have a non-offending parent. If not, things are much more complicated. Hopefully there is a non-offending parent that's not complicit in the abuse, if not some other legal guardian, adult, relative, hopefully, who's a safe person. But getting them, because it may rock the kids a little bit. For the kid, it may be something that's going on for a while, and it's going to do damage to them. But it may not be as much a crisis for them as it is for the parent. So really have to establish the equilibrium for the parent, so they can be in a place where they can be what the kid needs them to be. And similarly for them, preparing them for the medical and legal procedures. And using different language when we talk to the kid and we talk to the parent about these things in different level of detail. And again, obviously, also in these instances, providing referral for individual group therapy. But again, you're not going to solve this problem in crisis intervention. You're just going to get them through this crisis, prepare them for all the stuff that has to happen in the medical and legal world, and then refer them on for the next stage. Okay, so summing up, in instances of sexual assault, those core therapeutic skills, the empathy, unconditional positive regard, genuineness, they're always important, but just absolutely essential individuals in these situations. Again, because even though people are different, there generally tends to be a sense of fragility, because again, the assault is more than just an assault on the body. It's assault on the mind, on the self, on the soul. However you want to conceptualize that which is not strictly physical. It shakes people, and so you need to be your best therapeutic self. You don't have to be perfect. I won't put that much pressure on you, but you do need to be your best therapeutic self. And to do that, you've got to be, Gibraltar. You've got to maintain your own balance, and it's hard because this is an emotional thing to deal with. And you may want to be angry. You may want to be sad. You may want to scream and yell, but you can't in that room with that person. That's not what's going to help them. They can scream and yell. They can vent. But they don't need to see you losing control. You need to be the person that's calm and centered and knows what needs to happen next. Again, calm and centered is not the same thing as clinically attached, where, oh, you were raped. Okay, well, we got some things we need to talk about. Right? It's not that. It's not this cold, aloof detachment. But there is a calmness. This is a horrible thing happened to you. I can't begin to imagine what that feels like. But I'm not going to fall apart and start crying and weeping and yelling in front of you. Right? So I'm going to be empathic, but I'm going to be in control of my own emotions, because I have to be. Otherwise, you're going to freak out, because you're already, as the client, in this kind of storm of emotions. And somebody has to be on solid ground, and that's you, the therapist in that room. So maintain your own balance. Be knowledgeable about local procedures in terms of medical and legal procedures for what happens for sexual assaults, because it will vary depending on where you are. And if you don't know, ask other older therapists, more experienced therapists in your community. Find somebody, a nurse that works in the ER, and they're pretty knowledgeable about a lot of things, including that, and they can give you some good information. Okay, last discussion question. This is about finding a balance between absolution and control, and this is somewhat about crisis intervention, but also related to more kind of longer-term therapy with victims of sexual assault. One kind of difficulty that people don't talk about, I think, very much in terms of working with survivors of rape and other sexual assaults is the tendency of a survivor to blame themselves for what happened. Right? So we know that. But what we don't talk about is, how do you balance challenging the idea that it's their fault right? I.e., absolving them of any responsibility. There's nothing you could do. It's not your fault, right? Because we don't want them to blame themselves. How do you balance that with trying not to jeopardize their sense of control? Because if there's nothing they could do, there's nothing you do. Well, if there's nothing I could do, then there's nothing I can do to stop it from happening again next time. Right? Because we don't establish a sense of control, but we also want to establish it's not your fault. And those things might be in tension. How do you resolve that tension? Or maybe you think that there is no tension. You can easily do those things. What do you think? How do you resolve that tension, that balance between absolution, that it's not your fault, and control? You have control. Things aren't out of your control. Right? And I'll just kind of add to that side note that from some empirical studies, we do know that individuals that are higher in self-blame for the sexual assault are at an increased risk for re-victimization. So keep that in mind when answering this question. Okay, that's all for now. Take care.